Welcome, everyone, to this week's AI in Construction. Today, we're going to talk about building software without code, what has been called vibe coding. And actually, I'm going to get into that a little bit, like where that even came from. But the broader point and why this is such an important topic is you're hearing more and more about the quality of AI coding agents. And that shows up in the idea of building software without code. But even when that's not true, it's really amplifying how much a software developer can do. And I wanted to get into that and really kind of unpack what we can actually do. I'll take you through at the end. We've got a full hour today, so I'll take you through at the end an illustration of Replit. So we'll get into it. The whole idea of vibe coding came from a guy named Andre Karpathy. He's one of the sort of founding fathers of OpenAI, and he's just one of those folks who really had a lot to do with the beginning of deep learning and now AI and so on. So he just, there's a new kind of coding that he called vibe coding. So literally, came from this X tweet where you give into the vibes, embrace exponentials. Anyway, he was having fun with that. His point, though, is that the LLMs are getting good enough that you can trust them with some amount of coding. Now, I'm not sure he does this with real production coding, but the point is, that AI is getting to the point now where it can create certain things from beginning to end without any code. And again, I'll show you two things actually that I've done. But what's important is to understand the hype often gets carried away with this. And just because we can do one thing doesn't mean we can extend that line, and it means everything will be, open to being created as simply as this vibe coding idea. And as somebody who's spent a lot of time messing around with this stuff, I can tell you I've definitely seen the limits of it. And it's what you'd think. Like there's a certain level of complexity, an easy little web app, something that does a few simple things, absolutely works. If you wanted really complicated, like B2B software, there's just a lot more that goes into it than the code. And again, we'll get into that a little more deeply. But first, I want to explore actually the idea. So over the last couple of days and longer than that, there's been a lot of talk about what this even means. Replit, you'll hear me talk about. Not surprisingly, given it's their software that's at the center of this, they're saying you won't need software developers at all. Again, they're in a they're fundraising, they're selling their product. They've got a lot of reason to overstate the degree to which what they do solves every problem under the sun. It doesn't mean, though, that there isn't an enormous amount of value they're creating. Frankly, I think it's at least as important for prototyping and exploring ideas as it is for production software. And we'll get into what I mean by that. But just off the top of the head, you can imagine how if I can tell software or tell AI, hey, make me a thing that does this, whatever this is. And then it can make software that's nowhere near stable enough for deployment, but it does the thing. And I can go try that and have, maybe some of my customers or potential customers try it out and learn from them in a real visceral way, as opposed to showing them, a mock-up or even a clickable prototype. If it's actually functioning software, you just learn things you wouldn't learn any other way. So suddenly, I think there's a ton of value in that. We'll get into the idea of software, general software development. I just think that, like anything, is this going to go all the way to completely replacing everybody? I feel like no. I mean, of course, people have been wrong, but with statements like this. But frankly, we're more often wrong when we say the absolute is going to happen, as opposed to saying, look, it's going to work until we hit a limit. We'll discover the limit and then we'll move on to the next thing. That tends to be how the world works, not one thing completely replaces everything else. Yes, that happens with cars and horses and so on. But frankly, it's pretty infrequent, usually because the thing that's replacing something that's there before is good and is good, but not a perfect replacement anyway. So we'll see. It's still very early, but I think this is something people should be aware of, because even at the current state, the economics of technology and construction are likely to change. They already are changing. You're seeing some examples of that. So this is sort of paying off what Andre Karpathy. I'm sorry, there's a lot of little kind of things in here, but basically along the bottom, the very far left is a human expert, and that's sort of a benchmark where they've kind of modeled out what a very good human could do. And then these are some of the models that are out there and how good they are. And you can see they're approaching some of the best humans according to benchmarks. And again, as we'll explore a little bit later, That's just coding. That isn't building completed shipped software. And I think we have a bad tendency to oversimplify what really goes into doing certain things. And that's easy to do when you're not the one doing it, when you're from the outside looking in and you're just passing in briefs and feedback and so on. But the actual process of building software, as I know some of the people on the call will attest, is a little more complicated than just code. Um, Damien, please jump in. You're probably muted, but if you've got a question, just unmute and go for it. I can't hear you. Okay, I'm going to keep going, Damien. Damien, hold that thought. We can figure out how to unmute you a little bit later. So I'm going to keep going with this just to keep the conversation going. Just hold the thought, and I'm happy to answer it along the way. But the point in this is that the code is getting very good, and it's starting to really open up possibilities. So again, does this mean there's no software engineers in 2030? I'm saying no. Now this is 2025. It's May. Could very well be that in 6 months it's gotten to a point where it can do a lot of these things. But these are the sorts of questions, and it's just me kind of, spitting out some ideas here. But what are we even building, right? What features and functions are needed? Hold on a sec. I've got another one. Uh, Has, hey, Sam, can you unmute and tell me what your question is?
Yeah, excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but screen is frozen on the same slide if you are changing because I guess like other participants are also having the same view.
Got it. Let
You
me
have to,
reshare. It's okay. Let me
yeah, please.
reshare. So this should be everything. How about now?
Oh,
Can you see
perfect.
this? Thank you
Now
guys
we can
for
see.
letting me know. That's great. Uh, okay, so I'll get back into it. Where I was going before is, so I'm actually going to show you some of that stuff again. These don't matter; these are just headlines. But this is a chart that shows the coding accuracy. So at the far left, you see this human expert, and then compared to some of the models that we've seen over the last year or so. So they're getting amazingly good. Of course, this is the wrong week to do this since everybody's launched. Well, I know not everybody, but a number of models have been launched, and in fact very possible that today, coding with Claude, they have some update to Claude, because of course they will. But the point is, it's getting very good. And my point with today's conversation is, does this mean there's no software engineers? And my hypothesis or my statement here in May is there's so much that goes into what a software engineer does that I think no, I think there's going to be a role. How much code they have to write is obviously going to change. But what are we even building? Some of that's the PM's job. But often the PM understanding of what's possible can be driven by what a good software engineer and CTO will tell them. Features and functions, same thing. Often they're helping with that process because you don't always know what you can do. And it turns out that sometimes the framework you're using or the library you're using has interesting capabilities that the PM wouldn't even know and the customer certainly won't know. What architecture are we using? What resources are we using? How do we break that down into a project? How do we architect components? How do we design subcomponents? You guys get where I'm going with this. There's an awful lot of decisions. And it isn't just that AI maybe can't do it. You may not want AI to do it. You may not want to automate some of that thinking because you can learn some things by that process that is much more creative than people sometimes think. And that's one of the risks of automating more generally than code, actually, is the process of solving often is itself quite creative. And you expand what you might even want to do by solving some of the lower level decisions. So pulling all that into AI means lots of decisions that can be creative decisions, not just to go left versus right, are now taken out of your hands. So do we always want that? Sometimes we definitely will. If me as a non-developer wants to stand something up, I'm quite happy to not have all those decisions because I'm incapable of making them. But on the other hand, the idea that someone who lives in the code and really understands it and therefore can be a creative partner, that's all going to go away, I think is incorrect. I think you're losing something really valuable. And I hope it's not true. So anyway, that's kind of my take on that. It might mean that we need fewer. There was a conversation, there's been a number of them with Nadella, who I like to quote because he's just such a clear thinker. And he's like, look, the reality is the world is awash in technical debt. Every system has things we wish we had more people to fix or bring up to date. or expand on, so on. So we're not in a place right now where we're running out of things for software developers to do. It's very much the opposite. We could do with 10x the number. I don't know if we always need 10x, but we definitely could do with more software coding capacity than we currently have. So no, I think that the concern is a little overblown. Who knows where we'll be in 2 years? But from now, I think that we're overestimating the final delivered quality of automated software development. And I think we're underestimating the value that humans provide beyond just writing code and even low-level architecture. So looked at another way, though, is one of the ways to think about quality and think about what humans do and think about what AI can do is how long can you leave it alone? This is actually an old idea from management from literally the 50s and 60s. But the idea that right now, line by line coding, maybe you leave it alone for 30 minutes, this has been around for maybe 2, 3 years. Page level coding has been around, I want to say, for a year for sure. Feature level building is kind of where we are now. And then getting to architecture and product level management, I don't even know if AI does get there, but it's certainly not there now. This is where some of the reasoning models and some of the other kind of higher cognitive level ideas and capabilities might matter. But the net is at the moment, I think that there's some amazing things that have been unlocked, and I don't want to imply that progress hasn't been really impressive. What I do want to say is I think we have a bad tendency of overestimating where it's going to go next, because again, it's kind of the asymptote versus the exponential, which I'll get into in a second. But before I do, I want to spend another second talking about how AI coding agents are the best example of an agent for a few reasons. And that matters because when we think about the fact that, wow, I can type in a prompt and AI is going to build a whole agent for me. Well, if it can do that, surely I can use it in these other areas of my life quite equally powerfully. Maybe it can write a whole contract or it can design a whole building. Because my gosh, if I can vibe code an app, surely I can vibe code a building. And I want to point out that coding is being recognized as a special case for a few reasons. One is that code is a lot easier to evaluate. A thing runs or it doesn't. At the end of the day, you're still talking about something that is a form of engineering. Whereas for a lot of other things in life, it's a lot less easy to create an objective evaluation. The other thing is the people that are building agents are themselves developers. So they're much more familiar with the subject matter than they would be for a building or for a car or for music or whatever else. So again, it's a very special case that the experts in the subject matter are also the people building the tool. And that just doesn't happen as anywhere else. So the theory that people have is that the agent and the reason why they're so focused on the quality of AI agents, not just because they want them to be better to make their lives easier, but there's this idea that if we can build an AI that can build AI, you're going to have rapid improvement. So there's a number of reasons why there's a lot of attention being paid to AI coding agents that is not being replicated elsewhere. So I want to be, part of the point of today's webinar is, and the discussion is AI coding has gotten to a really impressive place, and we run the risk, and I'm seeing people do this, of taking what they've learned or the example of AI coding and applying it elsewhere and saying, surely we're going to have doctors that are that good. And my point is, it's very much a special case for a number of reasons, and it's important that we respect that and be real careful about how we're applying lessons from one place into another. The other thing here is that because we are able to look at this at a further level of maturity than other agents, it's really helpful to look at the possibilities and limits, because I think it's a good analogy, even if, as I say, it's a special case. The first one is, it started as autocomplete, and now it's really progressed, and we're watching it compress and kind of go up the ladder of abstraction and complexity. It can do more and more things, which is really impressive. The negative is, again, you're seeing the limits of it. And actually, I asked a developer I work with about this maybe 6 months, a year ago, and he was saying the same thing: is it doesn't do the thinking for you, and if you over automate, you miss some of what you need to do the more complex things, which is interesting. But the other thing that's really noteworthy is it's still a little weird. Like the things that when you ask it to do things, it makes it assumptions and makes leaps that a human probably wouldn't. And you're like, how did you get there? I don't understand this. The other one is that it'll get stuck and it'll just stop. So a few things to pull out of this. One of them is, and I've said this in other venues as well, that AI is not built the way a human brain is. So its failure mode sometimes will surprise us. That shows up here. So when you ask it to do something, sometimes the reasons it gets stuck or the decisions it makes, you're like, "Oh, why would that be a problem?" And the reason is because it didn't grow up like a human did. Its logical processes are different from a human, and the leaps it makes are going sometimes going to be surprisingly good and like, wow, I never would have thought of that. But other times it's like, oh my God, I never would have made that mistake. So it's a really interesting thing to watch, and it's interesting space to be looking at. But it's just worth knowing that it still has failures and it still has a way to go. And the question is, will it ever get to where we need it to be? Or is it so valuable in its own direction and its own sort of scope of capability that we need to stop worrying about whether it can replace a human and say, well, if we don't worry about that, what are things we didn't think of that only AI can do? And we really blow that out. And I think that's an area for exploration that, again, we keep getting distracted by artificial general intelligence. And I don't know that that's helpful. So again, takeaway here is AI agents, they still don't see a bigger picture. They don't have a world model. Even when we build a world model, I think it's going to be a different world model from what we see. I find that a good analogy is very junior workers. You hear the artificial intern idea, and I think that's valid here. Similarly, they'll get stuck and then stop, confidently present work that's not right, and you'll see an example of that in a moment. They don't know they don't even know sometimes that there's a bigger picture. They don't know the world outside of the thing you've asked it to do. And of course, they don't really self-criticize, which is some of what makes a human good is they're assessing things along the way and they're their own often worst critic. And more importantly, they're going to keep pushing the process forward because they're asking, is this right? Is this the right thing to do? How's this going to be used? And so on. And AI, there's no way, there's no model for that. There's no process for that. So it winds up producing things that are interesting, but maybe not quite there. And this is the kind of a nerdy way of asking a question, and I'll unpack it a little bit. But the idea of an asymptote, I think, is important because we have this problem where we see this curve, and in the beginning, this is kind of like the last 30 years of AI, and then some big breakthroughs have happened, and we've seen things move really fast, and we're kind of here right now. The assumption, though, is that this line is going to keep going straight and it's going to cross the line of human capability. And the problem with that is there's no reason to think that's true. Most technologies actually wind up flattening out at some point, and then they get replaced by whatever's next. And you've seen that even in AI, deep learning as practiced in the 2016 timeframe, very much kind of hit a wall, and then transformers came, and we found a really new curve. But the point is, we can't really map out even what human capability is. Kind of point number one. Point number two is that absolutely what we should be doing? Is comparing it to everything a human can do, or say, wait a minute, the profile of AI, of software generally, is different, and we should be more worried about not worried. We should be more focused and interested in what are the amazing things that AI can do, and it's okay if it can't do everything a human can. It's okay if it can't necessarily model out the world like a human can, or think in analogies quite like we can. I don't know that I'm right, but I think it's a question I don't hear often enough. And again, the problem is we assume that the current curve is going to keep going. There's a word that gets used a lot, which is humans don't think in exponentials. And my point there is that every exponential ends, even Moore's law, which a point I'll get to in just a sec. Um, you know, we don't need more humans. I mean, obviously, we need more human effort. What we need is superhuman tools and coworkers, even if they can't do everything we can. And that's where you're seeing value. And the reason I'm bringing this up is we don't need to wait for AI to keep getting better to say what's in front of us right now is already enormously valuable as a tool, and productionizing what's in front of us and working that into processes is already pretty amazing. It's superhuman in a lot of subdomains. Worrying about whether it's going to have emotions or consciousness, excuse me, or some of the other things that go along with it is, I think, distracting, and it's not something any of us can control anyway. Um, so I'll kind of wrap it up a little bit by saying leaders see this as building lots of their code. They see AI as building lots of the code. Nadella has said this. Google has said this. These are some other folks. I'm not going to read through it all, but really interesting. And we'll see. one of the points that's worth noting is Y Combinator, their latest cohort, something like a third of their, I don't know how many companies, but it's like 20. So you're talking about 6 to 8 companies had over 95% of their code was written by AI. Really, really interesting. Keep in mind, though, that you're talking about a startup. So they've definitely done some interesting things, but the question of whether all code is going, that doesn't indicate that all code will be written by AI. It means that startups can get amazing things done in ways that were not true before. I mentioned this before, and I'm going to dig into it a little more, is that I really love the idea that this is valuable for project managers and other folks on the non-coding side to say, let's build a real thing, spin it up, try it out live. It may have some bugs, but that's okay because I'm not deploying this for production. But I can get real feedback, and I can have people spend time with it, not just have it presented to them in a meeting, but say, hey, can you kind of kick this around overnight? I know there's some bugs in there, but tell me what you think of the idea. You just get much richer feedback. In the world of market research, there's a thing called an ethnography, which you never hear about because it's so expensive. And that's the idea where you follow someone around for a day or two, or sometimes longer, and you see things about how they view the world and how they operate in the world in a way you just can't in a focus group or an interview. And this is an opportunity to do that kind of thing because not only can you give them a real product, you can do some things to instrument the product and understand how they're using it, which is really interesting. So all of a sudden, vibe coding makes a product ethnography possible in a way that you just wouldn't think of before. So really interesting. And then the final point I put in here is it's always interesting to brief a software team who may or may not know the customer very well, depending on who they are, how new they are, and so on. Amazing way to show them what you mean and actually give people concrete things on which to say, well, I wish this were a little bit different. Now you're not just making images or paper prototypes, but now you've got a real functioning software, which is kind of exciting. Um, and the other thing I hinted at before, and I think is really interesting, is 2 or 3 devs can manage a lot more than they could a year ago. So I think you're going to see that minimum production level software team might only be 2 people. I think one is overstating it. I think that's a lot to ask one person to do. But you might see that 2 or 3 people can get amazing amounts of things done, and you are seeing that with Y Combinator. They've got companies who scale to 10 million ARR with less than 5 people, which is astounding. Some of them have been a little bit more than that, but not a lot, not 50 people. So the quantity of some software and more importantly, entire teams is remarkably small. Is that a stable business that can last? I don't know. But the point is they got really far with not a lot of people. All the automation isn't just code. Some of it's marketing, some of it's accounts receivable and so on. But the point is that vibe coding and AI assisted software development is a major part of that puzzle, which I think is really interesting. And the final point I'll get to before I dive a little deeper into vibe coding itself is this changes to me the value of a code base. And I think it'll change a lot. So see, like I mentioned before, AI, you can spin up the UI for an ad hoc request. So suddenly feature development can look really different. Small players can replicate a large code base a lot faster. So the incumbent's advantage of having spent 5 years on a code base isn't necessarily as much a moat as it used to be. Now, mind you, just because you can spin up code doesn't mean you've debugged it, doesn't mean you've really gone in and had all the customer feedback. So a proprietary code base isn't without value, but its automatic value is less than it was before. The other interesting one, and you're hearing this a lot, is being able to eliminate technical debt a lot faster. One of the problems with a big code base is it often means it's hard for you to pivot or adjust to new ways of doing things, whether it's new database structures or whatever. That suddenly is a lot less than it was. And the ability to build quality integrations and other things that just weren't so easy to do 2 years ago. And that's interesting because it means that the competitive playing field has just had one of its barriers changed. I'm not going to say removed, but it's changed in that new entrants can enter a lot easier than maybe was true before. Again, you haven't solved every problem, but you've reduced the value of one of them. And similarly, incumbent players can defend themselves easier than otherwise was true. You'll often hear people say that why Autodesk sometimes struggles to knit things together, or even Trimble similarly, here's the same thing. I think this really erodes the degree to which that's true. So 2 years ago, when Autodesk would buy somebody, and they're not alone, this is true across all software. It's a real challenge for them to integrate their old code bases, and often were very different code bases because, of course, there's different teams doing them. I'm not going to speak for Autodesk. I have no idea what they're looking at. But as an example, and Procore is the same thing. They've acquired a lot more companies post IPO than they had before. They'll have an ingestion problem too. And now they have the ability to say, are the expense to us of eliminating technical debt, of integrating acquisitions, possibly entirely rebuilding their code base is very different from what it used to be. And maybe less so today than we know it will be within the near future. The problem, of course, is it's not so easy for a technical team to say, you know what, we're going to stop building code the way we've been building it. We're all going to take 6 months off or 2 months off, learn how to vibe code or learn how to really use these AI tools. So it's not going to happen immediately. But as you think about strategy as a company, as a consumer, as a customer, this is heralding a change that hopefully will mean that software generally is just going to get better, work together better, be more nimble, and ultimately more reliable. So I think there's a lot that comes out of this wherever vibe coding ends up. And then my final point is, Vibe code agents are not a good example because almost nothing has this much data, almost nothing has so many technical people. Developers aren't shy about complaints, so your feedback is pretty amazing. Almost nothing else shows success or failure quite so quickly. Software does, like bugs show up really quickly, whereas bugs in the building do not. So that is it. I'm going to take a breath. We're 30 minutes in. The next thing I want to do is talk about the specifics of vibe coding. I wanted to talk, as I just did, about what I think this means for the industry and for software generally. But now let's go through and actually do real vibe coding. So I did this morning, so I've got a fallback of screenshots, but I want to talk about it and we'll actually try it. Hopefully it'll work. So I'll be vibe coding with Replit, but Bolt, Lovable, and there's a few others that are standalone. They're not software development environments that have AI in them, like Cursor and Windsurf and a few others, because those are great too. I just don't know them as well. Replit is itself, it's also a coding environment, but they were very early with their coding agent, and that's the one I'm going to use here. So you can build some useful stuff without any code. You just have to be aware of the limits. So try a simple web app, which we'll do today, if you're not a dev. And what's interesting also is I encourage you to go to a ChatGPT or somewhere and say, can you write a good prompt for me for Replit? You do need to be careful because it may not quite know what you mean. So you may have to work with that just a little bit. But anyway, it's really interesting. Bolt and Lovable, by the way, are a little better at websites. I did find that there's so many creative decisions in a website that it's not as much of a solve as you think it is. However, if you're willing as a no-code person to sit there and debug it and tell it what you want, you probably want to write a really good prompt, and you may even want to do some screenshots of the good examples. But it is pretty powerful. The other thing that's interesting here that I don't want to skip over, all of these will deploy it for you. So one of the big barriers for non-developers to anything like this is, yeah, it wrote me some code, but then what do I do? So if you go into ChatGPT, for example, it'll write code for you. And Google's even worse. They're so used to working with developers. It'll write code and then it'll say, well, here's what you should do. You should go over and create a server. And you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do any of this. What's nice about Replit is there's a button, literally a button that says deploy. And then it goes and does all the stuff, shows you what it's doing, but it does it for you, which is pretty amazing. So I'll show you that in a sec. Before I dig in a little more, I do want to spend some time though. In vibe coding, it's not a free pass. Like you still have to go through design, you still have to pace yourself, you still have to debug. Much of what a software developer does still needs to happen. You just don't need code to do it. Um, I'm going to go into Replit specifically here. Before I do, I just want to give you a little bit of orientation. So they have their own workspace, which is what their product was before. They've got an agent that does the dev for you, and they've got an assistant that will help you with it. And frankly, you don't even know the difference. Like you're in this, but you have access to the other two, and you barely know it. But it's worth knowing there's a little more going on there. Some guidelines that are worth knowing is try to not skip over it. I'm actually going to skip over it because I built something so simple. But think about features step by step, as opposed to one big prompt. test things as you do them. And that's easy. They give you a little pane you'll see in a moment where you can test as it's moving forward. Rollbacks is wonderful. They give you, you can literally click a button and it undoes the latest step. So if you ask it to do something that's just beyond its, and I've done this, beyond its capability, you click a button, it goes back, and it's just like Google Sheets or Google Docs where you can go back to an earlier version. It's wonderful. And all this is one button. You don't have to do anything other than literally click a button. And you can go all the way back 5 steps if you want to. The other thing they suggest is you start a new session. Remember, you're dealing with the chatbot here. So it remembers, it's going to consider everything that you've said so far. And sometimes if you're going through a whole debugging process, you want to erase all that when you go to your next feature. And again, don't hesitate to dump progress and go back. Some of this stuff, by the way, that I'm telling you now, there's a really good, if you like what I'm showing you and you're interested, deeplearning.ai has a bunch of short courses. They say they're an hour, they're always longer than that. But they'll actually, the Replit team actually does a very in-depth vibe coding course. I didn't want to go that deep here. But one of the things they say is be patient. It can do things that are really cool, really fast. Try not to skip ahead. Often fast will often hide some issues. As non-devs, we're not great at debugging. We don't know how to do it very well, and we haven't done it for 10 years. So you want to limit how much debugging you do, and the way you do that is by doing it step by step. So think about what you want to do. Often a piece of paper might help here. The Replit agent, it will explain why it's doing each thing. Read it. It's very much worth reading what it says and not just kind of hitting, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. Review the suggestions before accepting them. It's going to tell you, and you'll see that in a sec. And then be patient. So this is the course I was telling you about. The deeplearning.ai, I strongly suggest everybody check that site out anyway, because it's got a lot of stuff. Some of it feels very technical. Frankly, even the technical things are worth seeing because you can continue to progress and listen to them talk without doing the technical thing. And it'll often give you an understanding of something that you'll find useful otherwise. Obviously, I'm a nerd and I'm not the best example here, but I do find it valuable. So I want to be careful of time here. So I went in and said, "Hey, ChatGPT, I'm doing a Replit demo tomorrow. What should I do?" It came up with 2 dumb ideas. It's not important why they were dumb. You just know that you might have to work with it a little bit. But it said, "How about if you did something that would tell you, based on your zip code, is it a good time to pour concrete now or not?" Now I'm in the middle of Texas. Very relevant question. Not so much in May, but in August and July, it very much is. So then I also found that the prompts were not very helpful. It was confused about writing code versus giving me prompts. But what's interesting is in doing so, it gave me so these are the prompts, and like they're not helpful. I don't want it to prompt it with a Flask app with a root and a Bootstrap 5 seat. I don't know what that is, so I can't deal with it. Instead, what I did was I took its description of that. So when I asked it to do something, it gave me a really nice description. Build a pour concrete weather window, a single page Flask app with, that gives you, so I know what these words mean. So I can work with this. So I grabbed this actually and put it into Replit. So let me go back and grab that. So I have a fallback where I've actually done it. But let's go to Replit. Of course, I'm gonna have to find, here we go. And just pop that in. So I'm going to show you guys what happens here. Why did it do that? Let me try one more time. It may be grabbing some of the text. Hopefully it's not. Let's try again. Yeah. We'll just do a text edit. So this is me debugging live. So we'll just create something new, pop it in there. Yeah, it's got all sorts of weird formatting. So sorry you guys have to watch this, but it will help you to just see what are we doing. There we go. And then, so by doing this, oh, you don't want that. Let's just grab it all. There we go. Hopefully it's going to work now. Yeah, there we go. So basically it brought over some PowerPoint, I don't know, formatting or something. So I popped this in just as it is. And now it's going to go through a process, and the process takes a minute. So I'm going to let it do its thing. This will take a couple of minutes. First thing it'll do is propose an approach, and it'll often suggest some alternatives, not alternatives, it'll suggest some features that will be interesting. So I'm going to walk through this in the interest of time while it does its thing. So what we're going to see is it may or may not name it concrete pour predictor. I'm not sure, but this is what the UI is about to look like. So you'll have a preview pane here at this stage that I grabbed here. It was in the middle of doing it and doing some thinking. So that's what's happening behind the scenes. But what'll happen in here is this is the first example. There's no UI really. It's not pretty yet. It's just to test. And what happened was I put in my zip code and it didn't work. So then I said, okay, that didn't work. And it said, oh, all right, I figured it out. I figured out what was wrong with it. Sorry. And yeah, so this is the debugging windows. And we'll see that in a second. I have a feeling we'll need to do it again. The point was, I just said it doesn't work, and it went back and said, "Oh, I figured it out." And then actually, of course, it gave me an error message, and I grabbed the error message, popped it in there, and this is where it goes through and debugs for you, and it ultimately got to a place with a deployed app. So let's see what's going on here. Yeah, so here's what you get first, and I really like this. So it's telling you if you are somewhat technical, it's telling you what it's going to use. So we're going to use a Python, which I told it to do. It's using Bootstrap, which is one of a framework people often use. It's saying, do I want to add historical weather data? Do I want to implement notifications for change? These are nice ideas for today. I don't want to do that. Frankly, I think it's a better idea not to start with this stuff and maybe add it later. So I approve the plan and it's going to start thinking. So this is what you saw before. So you see it like it created its own name. I could have told it what to name it. I just didn't care. So I left out details that you absolutely can include. You can have things like make these colors. You can have it do, use this website as an example or as an input or whatever. So it starts building and you can watch it do things. This is where it's interesting to sort of see what it's doing. I don't really have time for this, and frankly, barely know what I'm looking at. I know, I mean, I've tried to learn coding, so I kind of know some of it, but not enough to be in any way useful. And then here, this is Revit, or sorry, Replit being Replit. They're saying, hey, you should totally add Stripe, which we don't need. So it's going to keep going, and there's not a lot to say other than to watch it. Here we go. So now it says it's created it. And it's going through the steps. So you're seeing how, I mean, look, man, it's funny how when we're live, everything feels like it's slow, but this is remarkably fast. This has been 30 seconds or so. Uh, and what should come out, just to kind of take up the time, is probably this. Probably this or something like it, where it's made a bunch of decisions, which I brought up before. So it's decided to use the ACI standard, the American Concrete Institute, for its reference. So I didn't tell it to include this, but it did. I didn't tell it any of this, which is kind of cool. So again, you can go in and make changes to that. Yeah, it's still kind of putting stuff up. You can, I'm going back to this. So you can make changes to any of these things. Again, for the purpose of standing something up, it's really interesting that it makes all these decisions. It shows to put in kind of about this tool. In fact, let me see. I have it live. I don't. Okay. Yeah. So let's give it a little bit longer. So again, the fact that this is doing this live is in this fast is pretty cool. You're seeing it's going through the different files that it needs to make. None of which, I would have been able to do myself. So while it's thinking, are there any questions? We've got ourselves a second here. Are there any questions from you guys on, kind of what I did or other experiences I've had building with some of these things? So I've tried Lovable, I've tried Bolt, I've tried Replit. I tend to be more interested in trying new apps out than with the other stuff. So I've spent more time with Replit. But I don't know, has anybody else had any experience with this stuff? Like maybe Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't worked with it personally, but I've worked with people that have worked with similar applications.
Oh, it's like watching paint dry. And it's like super fast until you're standing there. But you'll see it's kind of just in the middle of creating the preview here. And the other thing I didn't do, because we're all here, missing the request module. So it actually found something. So it did its own QA. So now it's actually making a change, which is interesting. Up here we go. All right. So now we've got ourselves and you'll note that the UI in this case is different from what my first version of it was. So this is what it looked like in round one. Different name, different UI. It's a little bit less, this was a little simpler, a little cleaner. So this one, it's added all this stuff, which is fine. It's added a Canadian example, which is fun. So I'm in 78704. Let's see what happens. I wonder if the Wi-Fi is just being eaten up because the other one was a little bit quicker. But while it does that, just to underscore some of the things that just happened that are pretty cool is not only did it deploy, it tested it itself and it realized something was missing. It went back and pretty quickly fixed it, which is pretty amazing. That doesn't mean we're not going to see a bug. This may itself be a bug. The fact that it's stuck, it should be a bug. Let's see. So you just type English in and say, it looks like it's got an issue here. See what it says. And I found, again, here we go, uncaught type error. So rather than sit there and wait too long, okay, bug, look at the server. So it's going to go through the process right in front of you. I built that other thing I showed you all in maybe 10 minutes or so. So really, really quick. And while it's doing this, I've tried other things that are a little bit more complicated. And I found either my own ability to structure the app wasn't there or it's not there. And it probably was on my end, but either way, as you think about what's helpful, like I created an app successfully that was that will allow you to, I'll enter a word or a topic, I click a button and it'll go and use Google Deep Research, sorry, OpenAI Deep Research, come back with a pretty interesting kind of deep dive into that topic, convert it into an MP3, and then allow me to download it. So that's the kind of app, or this one here, where you're basically having it like look up, can I pour today? Now, you probably know this. Like if you're a superintendent, you probably know this, but it gives you an idea of the level of quality, or sorry, level of complexity that you can pretty easily get stood up. And what I like about this is maybe this is still getting there when it comes to a user interface, but you can imagine a future where you create an app or you have a database or you have something and you allow people on a project team say, what I really need is for it to do this. And they go into a Replit, or maybe you've got the code on your own and say, hey, can you stand something up that will do these things for me? And now they have a tool that works exactly the way they need it. I think that's really interesting, especially again, if you say, kind of put a guardrails on it. I may have jumped the gun here. Still encountering the same error. Really interesting. So I hope I'm getting your name right. Haisam asked, is this a static app or can it fetch real-time information? Yeah, it's right. This is fetching real-time information, kind of. It's actually going and pinging the National Weather Service. So it's actually stood up its own APIs or its own API connections. And actually, the first time I did this, that was one of the problems. Is it connected to an API that it didn't understand or that didn't work, and that may be what it's doing again. Actually, we had a problem with time zones the first time. I think it was assuming Eastern, and I'm in Central, so I had to go through a couple of rounds of debugging. In fact, you may even see some of that in here. The things that it debugged were, yeah, updating the geocoding. So it had gone and grabbed some APIs. So that kind of answers your question, Haisam. But the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, in some of the implementations I tried before, it wanted me to go and create a database with it. It suggests you go use Supabase. And again, that was a little beyond my ability to do it. In fact, I think I did that with Bolt. But in all of their cases, yes, you can connect it to a database. You can connect it to an API. If you have an external API that you want to connect it to, as long as you have the API keys and the documentation, it will be able to do that. So it says making progress, took a screenshot, considering next steps. So it's actually spending a lot of time debugging and testing it itself, which is really exciting. So getting closer to working, fixing the remaining JavaScript errors. So the problem with demoing live is that there is a little bit of dead space, but hopefully you're starting to get an idea of what this can do and what it does for you. There's like 5 or 6 of these out there, and they're all competing with each other, which is wonderful. And they all have a lot of money too. They've all raised, 30 to $100 million. So this means that you're going to see this sort of thing get better, I think, pretty quickly over the year. The point that I was making with some of, discussing some of the limits is it's worth remembering that they're not fully replacing what you hire especially a mid-level or senior software engineer to do, but it's getting a lot of really interesting stuff done, which I think is pretty cool. So while it does that, I'm going to go and see if I can find, yeah, I can go and show you my current deployment. So the other thing this allows you to do is I've deployed 2. One is this, which I haven't looked at in a while, so hopefully still works. Yeah, there we go. So it's up, and they actually give you a UI for it. Yeah, it's been a little while since I've done this. Let's go look at the other one. So the other one that I deployed is the Concrete Pour Predictor. There we go. So this one, so you can see in here, it shows you the domain. It just did this. So, and the cool thing is if I put in, I'll just show you how the full app functions. And so not only is it saying, yeah, it's good, but also it gave me a bunch of additional information, which I thought was really fun. So, and I haven't even really dug into this, but it basically was looking at, how would it have been, how's it going to be tomorrow? So 100%. I might go in and say, white text against light green maybe isn't the best. That's exactly the kind of stuff that AI might not be good at, but a human would. But the cool thing is I put in that paragraph, did some debugging, and here I am. It got so funny. I'm not enrolling when I'm in Austin, but whatever. So really interesting stuff. So I think that mentioning that, yeah, with your circumstances, standards, and so on, you're in Japan. So this is assuming I'm in the US. What you would do is in your so Haisam just in the chat mentioned he'd love to try it locally, 100%. So what you would do is in the app, just say that I'm in Japan and I want to make sure you probably, because the standards are probably different, you might want to even give it the URL for where those standards can be found. I just, outside of the US, I wouldn't assume it knows to go look for that stuff. It might, but I just would, in the what's it called? When you prompt it, I would be careful with that sort of thing. So let's go back and see if we can preview the app, where it's at. So Concrete Pour Weather Window. Yeah, so it seems like it worked. Let's just go have a look. So let's see, 704. Yep. I think this is right, or is this the other one? No, this is the new one. So it made some of the same decisions, which is interesting. And what's cool here is you can choose to add a database. I said no. But anyway, so that, guys, that's I think we'll stop there. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what vibe coding can do. I'm impressed by its ability to stand up kind of lightweight web apps with someone who knows nothing about code. The point is, if you do know about code and you are yourself a relatively seasoned developer, this is an absolute superpower, because you can then go debug and you can guide it, and you can go into the code itself and make changes to the code base, and it automates a ton of things. And again, you can give it a way better prompt than I did and say, I want you to use these tools or these libraries or whatever. So for me, I think vibe coding is a really exciting development, and I think it's like everything, it's already pretty good, and you can see some of its implications. But I think that over the coming year, you're going to see even more interesting things come. And where I think there's an interesting and not discussed enough implication I hinted at before is it might mean that versions of this might be that you as an end user can actually take what a software developer, a company, has created for you and make that last mile of customization work. I think there's work to be done for it to internally debug and all that, but I think that's an exciting opportunity where the data structure and all the hard stuff is solved by a provider of software. But the last thing that you want, like the last step, the last UI might be something that you as a user can say, I want it this way. And they've controlled all the risk on their end, all the cybersecurity, all that stuff, but you're able to make it perfect for the last thing you want to do. I have myself been working with project teams here and there where they say, I'd love it if I can do this. And they'll often get ChatGPT to do things like make Excel. One guy I know used Excel to show, excuse me, ChatGPT to show him how to make Visual Basic code. He then put into Excel, told him exactly where to do it, and now their Excel's timesheets are doing things they absolutely love. They didn't need it enough to spend a lot of money on, but it's really made a difference to how they do what they do. And I think vibe coding is in that same bucket of real personalization and customization. I can see absolutely happening down the road a little bit. So, folks, that is it. We're close to the end of the hour. Are there any final questions? Excellent. Well, thank you all. Thank you for coming again. Anything you guys would like us to talk about over the coming, weeks and months, let me know. Otherwise, we're good to go. Thank you.